Well, if it was meant to distract attention from a week of political chaos in Downing Street, it worked. Whether it will help end the deadly channel crossings is less clear. The scheme will see potentially tens of thousands of people who arrive on boats and lorries given a one-way ticket to Rwanda, a country in Africa which came to the world's attention with the genocide in 1994. It is intended to deter people desperate to get to the UK and also scupper the people smugglers who prey on them. Our political correspondent Liz Bates reports.
Good morning.
Having been on the defensive after breaking the law over the Downing Street parties, today the Prime Minister went on the attack. His target, illegal immigrants who could, under a new plan, get a one-way ticket to Rwanda. Maybe with the local elections in mind, he leaned into language that has won him votes before, saying he would take back control of Britain's borders and criticising any lawyers who might get in his way.
We expect this will be challenged in the courts. And if this country is seen as a soft touch for illegal migration by some of our partners, it is precisely because we have such a formidable army of politically motivated lawyers who for years have made it their business to thwart removals and frustrate the government.
He also dismissed concerns over Rwanda's record on human rights.
Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world, globally recognised for its record on welcoming and integrating migrants.
Under a new scheme, anyone that the government judges to have arrived illegally since the 1st of January could be immediately removed to Rwanda. If they qualify, they will be able to settle in Rwanda. They won't be able to return to the UK. The pilot will focus on single men arriving on boats and in lorries. Boris Johnson says this is all about ending those dangerous journeys across the Channel onto these shores. So alongside the tough talk on immigration, the Navy will take over patrolling these waters. There'll also be more money for more surveillance, all with the intention of bringing that number down to zero and ending the people trafficking for good. But the head of the Refugee Council says this won't stop desperate people taking to the seas in search of a better life.
It's a cruel, draconian policy that treats people, vulnerable people, people who have been victims of trafficking, of torture, as human cargo, sending them on planes across the world, thousands of miles, to another country that has a very dubious record when it comes to human rights. It won't deter people from crossing the Channel. It won't smash the model of people smugglers, the business model of people smugglers. It won't address any of the real reasons why people flee.
The Home Secretary was in Rwanda signing the deal today and handing over £120 million, the initial cost. But if the scheme is rolled out in full, the Refugee Council estimates that could rise to £1.4 billion a year. This drew criticism from within the Conservative ranks, with a former minister saying it would be cheaper to put people up at the Ritz, and a Conservative MP saying the plan was just a distraction from the Partygate scandal. Sentiments echoed by the Labour leader.
I think we need to see these plans for what they are. It's a desperate announcement by a Prime Minister who just wants to distract from his own law-breaking. They're unworkable, they're extortionate, they're going to cost taxpayers billions of pounds, and they just reflect a Prime Minister who's got no grit, no answers to the questions that need answering, and no shame. And I just think Britain deserves better than this.
But it's voters' opinions the Prime Minister really cares about. So what do the people of Hythe on the Kent coast think to the policy?
I don't think I agree with that. I think we should be looking after these people. I am quite scared for their lives coming over. I think they're in a lot of danger. I can't honestly say what I know they should do about it. I do worry about them. But Rwanda seems a bit of a strange choice.
Yeah, keep them away.
Do you think?
Yeah, keep them all away.
Do you think that could stop people coming if they would immediately just be taken to Rwanda?
It won't stop it fully, but it could be a start of it.
I think it'd be better if they was processed before they got here.
In France?
Yeah. And then it's quicker.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But I don't know about Rwanda.
And with more scrutiny to come when Parliament returns next week on this and on his role in the Downing Street party scandal, it could be a bumpy ride ahead for the Prime Minister.
Liz Bates there. Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, knows Rwanda well and joins us from the newsroom. Lindsay, the government say Rwanda is the perfect place to do this now. What do you think?
Well, it's not the earthly paradise that ministers seem to be suggesting today. In fact, it has a rather poor human rights record. President Paul Kagame, he was today visiting Jamaica. He's known as very ruthless, particularly against his opponents. Paul Rusesabagina, he was the hero of Hotel Rwanda, who saved many people during the genocide, but later opposed President Kagame. Well, he was kidnapped from Dubai, taken back to Rwanda, and faced what is widely seen as an unfair trial. President Kagame admitted that he tricked Rusesabagina into coming back. And Rwandans who have asylum here in the UK, on at least 3 occasions, they've had to have police protection because this government, the British government, says that the Rwandan government wants to kill them or maim them on British soil. I was talking to one of them today. He told me how he turned up at Dover 20 years ago on somebody else's passport, said he needed asylum. He got asylum. He said, what would they do with me now? Send me back to Rwanda for processing?
I mean, you can easily see what the UK government gets out of this, but what does Rwanda get out of it?
Well, it's a business deal. They get money. This is a very aid-dependent country. But they also get legitimacy and leverage. It becomes much harder for this government to criticise the Rwandan government if we need them. But, you know, I'm not really sure that this policy is going to work. Israel tried exactly the same a few years ago. They had a secret deal with Rwanda that they would ship refugees, asylum seekers from other African countries to Rwanda. And what happened was that nearly all of them, about 4,000, absconded. They just went north and east and came on those boats from Libya or Egypt into Europe. And if that is going to be prevented, well, what are they going to do? Are the Rwandans going to lock people up, just as they do with the opponents of Paul Kagame? It's very hard to see how this policy can work.
Lindsay, thanks very much. Well, joining me now is Alexander Downer, Australia's former foreign minister who looked after their border policies, and he's been reviewing immigration here. And Jacqueline McKenzie, an immigration lawyer. Jacqueline McKenzie, come to you first. Almost 50 people died last year crossing the Channel, more than 150 in the last 5 years. Something radical has to be done, and the government says this is it.
Yes, I mean, something radical does need to be done, but this is not necessarily it. What we really expect to see, you know, we're a humane, compassionate society, is safe routes for people. And we've been talking to the government about this for a very long time. Safe visa routes. And even that's complicated because, you know, there are theoretically safe visa routes for Ukrainians and they're not getting in. So the whole thing really does need a massive overhaul. The important thing to look at is how many people are coming. There's about 30,000 a year. You know, there are 4.4 million people seeking asylum across the globe. The UK really doesn't have a problem with numbers, and we need to get that across.
But, I mean, voters would tell you otherwise. And the problem is for you and people who support your view is that the government say the public are on their side on this.
Well, they might well be on their side, but it doesn't mean that they've got the facts. The facts are what they are. And the UK does not have a major problem. You know, people will say, well, why don't they stay in France, for instance? Well, twice as many do. In fact, 3 times as many do. France pays £20 a week more in asylum support. It isn't true that people are coming here in huge numbers all for our benefits.
Alexander Downer, what do you make of this policy? Presumably you think it's a very good idea.
Well, I think it depends what you want to achieve, but ultimately if you want to stop people embarking on very dangerous journeys across the Channel, then you've got to destroy the business model of the people smugglers who are getting around £3,000 per person who gets on one of these rickety and they're often rubber boats. So, I mean, it's a highly dangerous activity to undertake. They're coming from France, so they're not being persecuted in France, and it makes sense to try to stop it. And the best way to stop it, we know from experience in Australia, is to demonstrate to the people smugglers that they can't deliver people to the destination that they're targeting. And in our case, that was Australia, in this case, the UK.
But when this was done in Australia, the United Nations begged Australia to stop doing it. It repeatedly said it was inhumane and incompatible with human rights. Does that not matter?
Well, some people in the United Nations had that view, that's true. No, it didn't matter because there's no perfect solution to this, but the alternative was to allow people to make these incredibly dangerous journeys And in many cases, people died. I mean, hundreds of people were killed.
You're working then on the basis that, if the conditions they're held in are inhumane, they suffer abuse, they're beaten, they take their own lives, that is the price they have to pay. Is that what you're saying?
But, there have been incidents, there's no doubt about that. And there's been a huge attempt by people, including the people who've been sent to Nauru. They're not exactly detained, but they're sent to Nauru and also to Papua New Guinea for processing. There's been a huge attempt by a small minority of them to try to break the back of the Australian system. But it's held up well. You could correct me here, but I think in 2012 or 2013, Australia had something like 20,000 people coming to Australia on these tiny boats. And after this policy was introduced, that was reduced the following year to around 150, and the year beyond that almost zero. So what we've done is, and I mean, I know some people were inconvenienced by it, that's true, but the alternative is to allow people to come across. Well, they didn't like it.
I mean, the UN said it was inhumane and incompatible with their human rights.
Australia is not an inhumane country.
OK, let me put that to Jacqueline McKenzie. The blunt truth is, it works.
Well, the UNHCR would disagree with that, and of course this gentleman has a vested interest in the Australian system. But these are not commodities, these are human beings. And in the UK, almost 75%, so when they arrive from the boats, almost 98% of them make an asylum application, and of those, over 70% succeed. We've today heard possibly as much as 75%. These are people seeking asylum who go on to be refugees. These are not illegal migrants, these are not economic migrants. Both the Home Office and the courts deem them to be refugees.
But the government are saying today, you heard Boris Johnson today say, we cannot ask the public to write a blank cheque for people who come here and may want to live here. Some may be asylum seekers, some may be economic migrants. And he says we have to distinguish between the two. And he says this new path to Rwanda is fairer on everybody.
Well, we have obligations in international law and in international treaty. That's the first thing. We're either, based on which measure you look at, the 5th, 6th or 7th richest nation in the world. We get 30,000 people.
There are 80 million people don't want uncontrolled immigration.
There are 80 million displaced people in the world. 26 million of them are refugees. 4.5 million are claiming asylum. Venezuela saw 4 million people leave in the last 2 years. 2 million of those have ended up in Colombia, a poor country. Poland has taken 2 million Ukrainians. We're talking about 30,000 people. It is unacceptable for us to be talking about them as though they're commodities that could be shipped across the globe to a country that does have an atrocious track record on human rights.
Alexander Downer, really, really quickly, the truth of the Australian policy was that it was not cheap. This cost billions and billions of pounds.
Well, so it would if people were allowed illegally to come to Australia. If you didn't have a proper immigration policy and allowed people just to swarm into the country without any controls, that too would be hugely expensive.
Going to have to stop you both there, but thank you so much for talking to us.
I think this plan is unworkable, it's also unethical, and it's extortionate in terms of the cost. It's potentially going to cost the taxpayer billions of pounds. I think overall this is really a desperate and shameful attempt to try and distract from Boris Johnson's law-breaking and also from Priti Patel's complete failure in a whole series of Home Office areas.
Well, the government would say that this is a manifesto pledge. This is something that they've been working on for a very long time. This is something that voters want them to work on as well. So, as I asked, what is your alternative plan to stop people smugglers from getting people into the country like this?
Yeah, this plan's not going to do that, let's be clear. I think there are things that the government should be doing, but this plan isn't going to do anything about the criminal gangs who are exploiting desperate people. It's doing nothing to clear the backlogs to actually increase the decision-making, because Home Office decision-making on asylum cases has halved in the last few years under Priti Patel. And it is going to mean tens of billions of pounds of funding, which we have no idea where it costs. Four things that the government should do.
What should Labour do?
Four things. First of all, they should be taking much stronger action around the criminal gangs, and there is no alternative to the hard graft with the Europol, with French police forces, with other police forces across Europe to tackle those criminal gangs and prosecute people.
That is something that they have been working on. It's something that hasn't worked, so they're going for this.
No, but they're not actually doing this effectively at all. And they're also making it harder to prosecute traffickers. That's what the legislation does. That's what the Slavery Commissioner does. So they should be taking much stronger action to tackle the criminal gangs. There's no alternative to the hard grafter doing that, and Priti Patel isn't doing that. Second, they should be negotiating the new agreements, international agreements, on both safe returns and safe legal routes. That is hard, but again, they promised us they were going to have that sorted. They're not doing it. Third, they should be speeding up decision-making. At the moment, we're taking fewer decisions on asylum cases in this country than they are in Belgium or Netherlands, even though we're a much bigger country.
Just while we haven't got time, I want to put this point to you. This is essentially what people who voted for the Conservatives want them to do. Aren't you out of touch with those voters?
I don't think people voted to spend tens of billions of pounds that we haven't got on an unworkable system that won't actually stop the criminal gangs.
They voted to solve the immigration problem.
What people want, I think, is they want a fair immigration system, and they also want to make sure that we do our bit alongside other countries to support people who are fleeing persecution. That's what you've seen in the response to the Ukraine crisis, for example. That is not what the government's doing today. I think it's going to unravel. It's unworkable what they're proposing. Huge costs. The 120 million that they said it will cost today doesn't even pay for the transfer of a single individual person. It's simply an upfront cost to Rwanda simply to agree a press release.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.